We'll start anyway. First of all, welcome to the Hemlock Society of San Diego. This is our 30th year in San Diego, so if you're just discovering us, we'll be around another 30 years, so you haven't missed too much. Our purpose in life is to educate the San Diego community about all end-of-life options, not just medically assisted options for terminally ill people. So to that end, we're celebrating our 30th anniversary with our big all-day conference on November 4th. There's a charge. It's less money for Hemlock members, so this would be a good incentive to join if you haven't already, or to renew your membership if you haven't. So we're going to be talking about peaceful death in Switzerland, Final Exit Network, a lot of things that you don't ordinarily hear about. And we have a program every month that many of you know about and come to on alternate months. So next month, we do our Right to Die film series, which has been very good. And we're showing one of our oldest movies from 1947 called An Act of Murder with Frederick March. It's really good and it's amazingly timely. You will certainly enjoy it. And that is at the Mission Valley Library next to IKEA, however you pronounce it. So we have those notices back here. And if you would like to be on our mailing list and don't get notices about our programs, and if you have email, you can sign up in the back, put your name and phone number and email address, or better yet, become a member, and then we'll send you our newsletter. What else? This is our newsletter. And what else did I leave out? Two things.
How you heard about us?
Yes. So we're sending around a clipboard that asks you how you heard about us. We're trying a lot of different advertising methods. We want to know if they have gotten to you and they work. So if it's a UT ad or a reader ad or a friend or local newspaper or whatever, the radio, we've been on the radio, just put it down there. We really would like to know how you get the word. We know that a lot of people in San Diego don't want to hear about death and dying. And if you are one of those people and you'd rather be in the Middle East dance recital place next door, we will understand because that's a lot more cheerful.
But that costs $20.
It costs $20. Oh, forget it. They're very tolerant of us being here. They say this is life, and that's part of life, and this is part of life, and on it goes. We have our new planning packet back there. Is that right, Pat?
Yes.
Which has the documents you need for end of life, and glossaries, and commentary and all sorts of things that will be invaluable. So everything that is back there is available for a suggested donation of whatever you can afford. That's, I think, the end of my announcement. So, as you know, a year ago, a law permitting medical aid in dying went into effect in California. It's called the End-of-Life Option Act, and it permits physicians to work with terminally ill people who would consider taking a lethal medication to end their lives peacefully. That's our goal here, is to inform you of all ways to achieve a peaceful death, peaceful, nonviolent death that your loved ones can be present at. So we have asked people, 5 people, one cannot come, and the other 2, I'm not sure where they are, to talk about what their hospices are doing or what their services are doing to help people use the End-of-Life Option Act. It is not easy to use, but it's not that difficult either. So I'll introduce the 2 people that are here. One note, yeah, one other note. This is Ken Watson, who is videotaping this. And if you don't want to be on the videotape during the Q&A, he advises,
The sound.
The sound, not to ask a question. Get your neighbor who would like to be on the video. Yeah. Have I forgotten any other announcements? No. Okay. So at the moment we have Dr. Carl Steinberg, who is Medical Director of Hospice by the Sea. Is that right? Yes. And longtime doctor involved in end-of-life care, particularly in, well, he'll tell you he's a sniffologist. He works with, what does it stand for?
Skilled nursing facility.
Yes, skilled nursing facilities. So that's people who are pretty far advanced. You can talk about that. And then we have Dr. Bob Ooslander. Many of you know Dr. Bob. He has an organization called Integrated MD Care, which he'll talk about, and how that fits into end-of-life options. So with that, I'll start with Dr. Carl Steinberg.
Thanks, Faye. I think I was going to do it sitting, but
No,
I
it's
can't
great.
see people. So anyway, it's been a while since I talked to this group. It's probably been a few years, but it's nice to be back here. And thank you for having me. And it's an important topic. I was going to make the joke about the belly dancing, but Faye beat me to the punch. And I love this woman. She's truly a marvel, I think. So give Faye. Yeah, she's going to do belly dancing to wrap up. And Bob over here, you guys know him. I heard that last time he spoke here, somebody actually passed out and he had to provide emergency responses. And today, if that happens again, he was an emergency room doc, so I'm going to leave it to him to do it again. So we won't be fighting over that. Anyway.
My talk was that good.
It was just that good. All right, well, let's see. I'm going to get 2 people to pass out, okay? Anyhow, so in all seriousness, and Bob is probably the authority in Southern California on the End-of-Life Option Act. To me, I have to admit, I had a lot of ambivalence about this, and you know, all the things you hear about, the slippery slope argument, just, you know, it's not part of my job description. I went to medical school not to learn to help people die or not to give them something to make them die, right? On the other hand, one thing I did learn was that what I was supposed to do was take care of my patients and walk the path with my seriously ill patients wherever that path took them. And so, you know, it's the law now, and I think it's an option that, you know, for some people that's totally appropriate. Other people, you know, I'm just afraid, honestly, that, I don't know how many of you read that New York Times article recently about that guy up in Canada. You know what I'm talking about? In Canada now they can actually do euthanasia. The doctor can give a lethal prescription, you know, lethal injection. And this guy, he was a, you know, jolly old, you know, bon vivant, raconteur. He was a, you know, and he had painful amyloidosis, and he was terminal, and he decided to ask his doctor to end his life, and they threw a big party, and you know, it was nice, but I read the article, and it just seemed so heroic. You know, it was just like, oh, this is just so great. You know, the doctor's a hero, the guy's a hero, and you know, I'm not sure I necessarily look at it that way, and I just fear that people are going to look at this kind of thing. It's going to be the new trendy way to go, and you know, let's. I just don't want people to check out any earlier than they need to. I'm all about autonomy. I think autonomy is super important. So anyway, so I've been a hospice medical director since 1995. I like to say, you know, before it became fashionable, right? I mean, palliative care, hospice, it's all, you know, and thank goodness, it's really, you know, we've got a lot more visibility now, and I think that's it's super important. Unfortunately, access to pre-hospice palliative care is not always that great, but it's getting better, and I think, I mean, who knows? I mean, if this stinky piece of poo coming out of the Senate actually goes somewhere, you know, there may be a lot less, you know, of that to go around, particularly to disadvantaged people, and that's a whole other lecture. But anyway, you know, as a nursing home doctor, it's been. And by the way, let me just say, I don't know how many of you, I mean, this is the Hemlock Society, so maybe a lot of you have oh, first, let me ask this. How many people have formulated advanced directives or pulsed or both? Yeah, okay. That's great. I need to take a picture of that because, usually I give these talks and it's like, you get a handful
But are they
of
still in your
hands
desk
going up.
drawers?
That's how many haven't.
Yeah. Well, how many haven't? Let's see if you're willing to raise your hands. Okay, why not? Come on, guys. It's simple. I mean, really, an advance directive is simple. You got to make sure you pick the right person, though, right? You got to pick a person that will make the hard decision. Okay. Okay, how many people have formulated an advance directive or both? Put them up, baby. All right. Thank you. You're going to text that to me, right? Okay. But anyway, so now I've totally lost my train of thought. But oh yeah, I know what I was going to say. I hope nobody here has told their children, Michael, how are you? Don't ever put me in a nursing home. Whatever you do, never put me in a nursing home. That's a really toxic thing to tell your kid. It's just, nobody knows what's going to happen, and your kids have jobs, and if you have a devastating stroke, unless you've got a lot of resources, you are not going to be able to stay at home. So either amass enough resources that you can pay for full-time care, but don't make your kids problem. I mean, that's toxic, and so that's a lead into nursing homes are not the most horrible places in the world. Okay, they're not Disneyland, they're not the belly dancing convention, but they are not horrible. And this is where I've spent the majority of my professional life. And I would just say, if you haven't been to a nursing home recently, maybe if you've got time to do a little volunteering, there are a lot of lonely people there. A lot of people don't have families, but they are not the worst places. Some people, I bet there's people in this audience, I won't ask you to raise your hands, but they would say, I would rather be dead than be in a nursing home. And please just give that a second thought. That's, a lot of wonderful care goes on in those places. You always hear about, the person, posting stuff on Instagram of slapping the old lady or, these kinds of things. And that's most people who work in nursing homes are wonderful, wonderful people. So what I would say is, over the last 25 years since I've been doing this kind of work, it's not been unusual for me to go in and, I'll have this conversation with every new nursing home admission, because most of the time it's the first time I've seen them. And I'll say, so this is a question we ask everybody. I'm not saying that this is about to happen to you, but suppose you were to have a medical catastrophe, like a full-on cardiac arrest, a giant stroke, would you want the most aggressive treatment to try to resuscitate you? And sometimes people will stop me flat out and just say, oh, well, heavens no, no, if you do anything to prolong my life, so help me God, I will come back and haunt your ass where I did that, or I pray to God every night that He take me, and that kind of thing. And so, and then sometimes along with that, now my claim to fame is I take my dogs to work with me every day, and they're not allowed in the Scottish Rite Center, or they'd be by my side today. But anyway, people will say, come on, Doc, can't you give me, I mean, if your dog were in the kind of shape I'm in, you'd give them something to put them down, wouldn't you? Can't you do that? So it was always reassuring over these decades to be able to say, oh, come on, I'm not allowed to do that. But it was a nice entree to a conversation about what would make you say that, whether you were joking or half serious or what. So the very interesting thing is that since June 9th of 2016, not one person has asked me that question. And I'm thinking, well, they probably are going to be like, well, can't you give me something to put me down like a dog? Oh, sure. Yeah, here you go. And so anyway, now my hospice, it's Hospice by the Sea. It's a small for-profit hospice based out of Solana Beach. And you'll hear a lot of talk about for-profit versus non-profit hospices. I think there's a lot more difference between individual hospices than there is in general between for-profit and non-profit. And it's a small hospice, and it allows us to do things that perhaps some of the big, more corporate-based hospices can't do. So that's my little pitch for Hospice by the Sea. And Bob has worked with us with some of our patients. But anyhow, so we've got a policy that where we will support people and participate with them in the End of Life Option Act. And there's a whole variety of different attitudes among hospices. And if you come to a point in life where you are going to be going on hospice, and this is something you might want to do, I would just encourage you to find out if the hospices that you're considering. First of all, we've got dozens of hospices in San Diego County. and some are excellent and some are not as good. And so do research, and you can meet with several different hospices, and any of your friends that are looking at that. Usually it's not an emergency, and you can spend some time talking to people about what they would offer, what sets them aside apart from other hospices and so on. But anyway, because it's a shame, and this is happening in other areas within our state, where somebody signs up for, and even in San Diego County, right, where somebody signs up for hospice, and then the hospice is like, as soon as the person mentions that, they're like, oh, well, and then, either the person has to change hospices and meet a whole new team of caregivers. It's disruptive, right? And this is a time when that's the last thing you need is more disruption and so on. So I think that's most of what I need to say, and just that.
So what happens in Hospice by the Sea if somebody makes that request?
If in Hospice by the Sea, we will get you what you need. I mean, we will, and usually we'll call Dr. Bob to be the prescribing doctor, and then one of our doctors will serve as the consulting physician, and our staff will. Now, there are people. We've got multiple nurses and different disciplines. So if we know off the bat that somebody may be considering the End of Life Option Act, then we would not assign a nurse. There's some nurses who don't believe in it, although I think there may only be one, but we would not assign that nurse because that way it'd be less disruptive. Yes.
Would you participate with a resident who says, I no longer want food or drink?
Oh, well, that's a whole different topic. And I mean, that's certainly, when we talk about, I don't really like the word End-of-Life Option Act because it sounds like it's the only end-of-life option. I mean, gosh, there's lots of options, and voluntary refusal of food and fluids or voluntarily stopping eating and drinking is something that I'm actually a proponent of, and it's something that we've seen many times in nursing homes over the years. And it's not a bad way to go. Now, some of you might think, well, 10 to 14 days, that's way too long. I just don't want to do it. But, usually the person falls asleep within the first, 3-4 days and doesn't wake up. And it's really a very peaceful way to go. My mom died that way. She was kind of, before that started, she was kind of bloated. She'd been on prednisone for a long time, and as her dying process, and she lasted 17 days. I've never seen anybody last that long with absolutely nothing by mouth, and no IVs or anything like that. And but her face got. I mean, it was kind of beautiful. It was excruciating, but beautiful. And anyway, I would encourage people to do that. And if you have hospice involved, then they can give you medication so that. You can be comfortable throughout that. Yes, sir.
Could you go over the differentiations between hospice and hospice? Like you said, look to see what one does and one doesn't do.
So everybody can get in.
Would you explain the differentiation between the hospices that you're saying we should look at?
Oh, well, you're not talking about just whether they participate in the End-of-Life Option Act.
In general.
Oh, like what services they will provide and how frequently. Do they have alternative things? Like, sometimes there's aromatherapy or pet therapy, or, we've got a harpist. You hear that stuff, you think, oh, wait, am I already dead? Did I go to heaven? No. Anyway, I think I've talked long enough, and we'll have time for some Q&A afterwards. Okay, one more question.
Can you describe the assessment?
I can repeat it.
Wait just a second. If you want to hold up your hand, I'll bring you the mic.
Can you describe the assessment to determine whether or not someone is mentally competent?
Yeah, so it's basically a capacity assessment, and so far when I've participated in these cases, I have not felt it necessary to get a mental health, a psychology or psychiatry evaluation. But essentially, you have to make sure that the person understands what they are doing. They understand the other options, including, we have palliative sedation to unconsciousness in cases of unbearable suffering, right? Where they can put you on an IV drip and basically make you unconscious. And generally, people don't wake up. Sometimes we might relax it to see if they're not as in as much discomfort. But I mean, there's lots of options, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. So make sure the person understands those options and can articulate it and why they're making this particular decision. And in most of the people I've seen, it's not subtle. You know, it's they know they're dying. They don't want to. It's not the. They just don't want to get from point A to point B. They just want it quick, you know, and then so that they, and also to make sure that they do not have some kind of a serious mental illness that is impacting it. Like, you know, somebody that says, oh, you know, the aliens are broadcasting to my filling that it's time to take the lethal prescription. You know, that would clearly suggest that they had impaired decision-making capacity. Now, you know, the more complex is that people might have depression, right? Severe depression. And, you know, most people who are dying, they're not super cheerful about it. Once in a while, I mean, over the years, I've had a few people who, you know, it was kind of a relief and so on. But usually people are not happy about it. And of course, you're sad. But are you so depressed that it is impairing your ability to make an informed decision? And so far, I've not seen a person like that. If I thought it was a borderline case, I would definitely get you know, a psychiatric evaluation and try to address the depression. But you know, if there's overt psychosis, anyway, that's basically it. It's not a super involved capacity assessment. I mean, it's not on the form. It doesn't have to say exactly what, you know, some check boxes that have to be filled out. But I want to feel comfortable that I'm not, you know, that the person knows what they're doing.
Got a question over here.
If this type of outcome was proposed to you when you were about 27, 28 years old, and you've now gone a few years beyond the projected time, why is it so hard, and how do you get your family on board to realize the end is coming?
Okay, that's a question I'm not sure I can answer. I mean, it's hard to get families on board, period, sometimes, right, Bob? I mean, it's, you know, as a nursing home doctor, I have these conversations with people all the time, and I'd say 95 times out of 100 at least, the patient is super grateful for the conversation.
Are you allowed to work on your own?
What's that?
Are you allowed to put it together on your own?
What do you mean, put it together?
Just deal with the details yourself. Just go ahead and do it.
Well, anyone has an option to, I mean, there's nothing preventing any person who has autonomy, decision-making capacity from doing whatever they want, right?
Well, your family can step in now.
Your family could step in. Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that. I just say you got to have a, you know, if that's what you want to do, you've got to have a plan where your family can't step in. Anyway, that's probably beyond the scope of our discussion here. But I want to let Bob talk, and then we'll do some Q&A after. So thank you.
Thanks. Have our other two speakers shown up, Dr. Danke, Dr. Panzer? No, okay.
We don't see them up there? All right.
No.
Well, I'm Bob Uslander. I'm a physician as well. And I apologize for the doctors who didn't show up. I apologize on their behalf, but it also gives us more time to talk. And I think that Carl and I can fill up the time well and answer all of your questions to your satisfaction. So, can I see a show of hands of people in the room who are in support of the end-of-life option, who believe that it's a good thing?
It's a Hemlock Society meeting.
I understand, I know. Although we were to talk at the La Jolla Library last week, and we had a very similar, I think it was unanimous. Is anyone willing to raise their hand who is in opposition, who doesn't who believes that this is that this law is not a good thing?
Not sure yet.
How about weaknesses in the law?
Well, clearly, there's weaknesses in everything. Some people think it doesn't go far enough, and some people. But in general, I think we're all in agreement that it's a step in the right direction. Correct? Yeah. And I do as well. So, just briefly, I spent the first 22 years of my career as an emergency physician. So, from very early on, my whole focus was on trying to save people's lives at all costs. We really didn't think about whether it was the right thing to do or not. People came into the ER and the paramedics were already doing CPR or whatever happened. The idea was we're there to save them. I had some personal experiences with friends, and I became a little older and wiser, and I realized, well, this isn't always the right thing to do, and I started spending a lot more time contemplating that. I became the doctor in the ER that all the nurses wanted to be on when there was a code that came in, because I would often, after getting the information, seeing the age of the person and what was happening, the paramedics would bring them in, move them over to the table, and I would say, we're done, right? Whereas most of the time, it was another 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour of trying to resuscitate this dead person. And if you got a heartbeat back, that was wow, we got a heartbeat back. They got to the intensive care unit and they died 4 or 5 more times, and there was never a good outcome in those situations. So a few years ago, I actually found myself gravitating more towards wanting to work with older adults, and I remember sitting there towards the tail end of my career as an ER doc and thinking, it would be so much nicer just to help people die, just to help people have a better end of life, rather than trying at all costs to save them, when a lot of the time they either didn't want to be saved, and they would tell you that flat out, or they couldn't tell you that because they were in this incapacitated state. So I started thinking more about where I belonged, and I had a little epiphany that really reaffirmed that I was really here. My calling was to help people at the end of life. And I started working in palliative care and hospice. I moved to San Diego. I had a huge transition. I started working in a palliative care and hospice company that was also for-profit and building this palliative care model. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful to be in people's homes, to be able to deal with these complex issues and support their families and help identify the things that they needed to have a better quality of life. But I also found that there were still so many limitations and restrictions and so much bureaucracy that people still weren't fully getting their needs met. So I started my own practice to try to do that on a more intimate scale, to go into people's homes, to bring a team in that has both physician, nursing, and things like massage therapy, music therapy. We don't have a harpist, but we have very talented people, and light sometime. Acupuncture, yoga, meditation, nutrition. So we bring in this whole team of people to support somebody who is either in their last year or two of life, or sometimes in their last days of life. And I was kind of building this and happy, and everything was moving along, and then June 9th came along. So about 6 months into starting this new practice, this law change passed, and I was aware that it was coming, but I wasn't really thinking that it was going to have much of an impact on my life. I thought I'd have some patients that would be looking for this option, and that would be nice that we can do that. But I also assumed that other doctors would be willing to support their patients. And lo and behold, I was ignorant. And it wasn't the first time, I've been there before. But it turns out that very few doctors are able to support patients through this. And very early I started getting phone calls from patients and family members who were in this weird place where they had been waiting for this law to pass because they were struggling through their cancer, with ALS, with their various ailments, waiting with bated breath for this law to take effect. And once that happened, they tried to get support from their doctors or other doctors, and they got shot down every time. So I was getting phone calls from people in San Diego, in Orange County, in Riverside, who had called sometimes 10, 15, or one person called 20 doctors to see if they could get support, and it wasn't happening. So because I work on my own, I have my own practice, I don't have anyone telling me how to practice, what I need, what I can or can't do, I started really looking into this, and I started supporting people through the end-of-life option. And I became very well versed in the process and the medications, and developed relationships with pharmacies. And it has been the most meaningful year of my life, being involved in these incredible scenarios where people are really struggling, and we now give them an option, right? I'm not promoting it, I never encourage it, I don't suggest it, but when somebody has gotten to the point where they are dying, where their life is coming to an end, and that end is out of their control, and the best case scenario is that they can be sedated into unconsciousness until they die, and they're wanting to have control to create this experience, it's been amazing. So I'll just share that I've had about 33, 34 patients that I've evaluated and taken, and about 30 of them have gone down this process. 25 of them have taken the prescription, and I've been with 20 of them as they took the medication and died. So I do believe that without actually anticipating going down this path, I have become sort of the Southern California expert in this end-of-life process. And I was, for a long time, I didn't want to talk, I didn't promote it. I didn't, share it. Some people would find me sort of through the grapevine, and it was hush-hush. But I no longer feel like it's something that I should keep secret. I still have my practice, and the majority of my time is spent taking care of people and providing quality of life and giving them the best chances of living as long as they can. For those people for whom it is clearly life has become too much of a struggle and they're ready to go on their terms, it's really been quite an honor. So, would it be helpful if I discussed the process a little bit and said what exactly it looks like? Because I think there's a lot of kind of confusion about how involved it is and what's required. And when it gets into an institution, like when people are part of UCSD or Sharp or Scripps or Kaiser, I don't know how. I've heard Kaiser has a pretty streamlined process, and people have been supported there pretty well. I've heard that at UCSD, and I wish Lynette was here because she would have been able to address that it's cumbersome and it can go on for quite a long time. It's pretty darn straightforward. You have a conversation with the patient. So the patient has to make 2 verbal requests of the attending physician. The attending physician is somebody who they have a relationship with. They don't have to have had a previous relationship with them, although that would be ideal if you could ask your primary doctor who's been taking care of you for 20 years to be your attending physician. That would really be wonderful. But the patient needs to make 2 verbal requests of the attending physician. So I become the attending physician. You say to me, Dr. Bob, I'd like a prescription for a medication to end my life. That starts the clock. That starts the process. And it's supposed to be face-to-face, alone, so that I'm sure that your children aren't like holding a gun to your head to make you say this. I have to determine that you're competent, that you understand the impact and the consequences of what we're saying, and that you are making an informed decision. I have to determine to my comfort level that you have a terminal illness and that you're likely to die within 6 months. No one has a crystal ball, so we don't know that for sure, but it has to be reasonable that your time frame is 6 months or less. So the other parts of this are you need to have a consulting physician confirm that you have a terminal illness and that you're competent. And they sign a form that says this individual is suffering from this terminal illness and they're competent, and they sign that form. That's all the consulting physician has to do. You sign a written request that says, I, John Doe, am suffering from cancer, and I am voluntarily making a request of my doctor for medication to end my life. And then it has you check off, I have notified family members, I intend to notify family members, or I'm not notifying family members. I think those are the 3 options. But there's no requirement of notifying anybody. That form is signed and witnessed by 2 people. 15 days later, after the first verbal request, you can make a second verbal request to the attending physician. After that, as long as we have the consulting form and the written request, we can write the prescription. You can, at that point, choose to have the prescription filled, or you can not. It's your choice. You can choose to fill it and have it delivered to your home, or not. At that point, it becomes your choice. That alone has given many people great peace of mind. Just knowing that if things were to get worse and get to a point where they're really intolerable, or if their ALS gets to the point where they're maybe not able to swallow as well, or there's just certain, and we kind of identify this. Part of what we do in this conversation that goes on for sometimes weeks is we identify what are those triggers, what are the things that for you would make you feel like it's time to take, to do this, to check out. And for me, I also, am I not speaking loud enough?
Correct. Please louder.
Okay, I'll try. Can we turn the volume up a little bit?
Yeah.
For me, the great benefit is that I have a relationship with the patient. I'll speak to as much as I need to the family members to make sure that they understand what's taking place, as long as it's okay with the patient. And I get to be part of this process so that there's no confusion. If there's a question about it, they email me or call me. We're there, once the decision is made to initiate the process, then I think that they feel supported, and they feel like they are on the path that's going to ultimately give them the peace of mind that they're looking for. Is there anything else critical that you think on this part that I should share?
Attestation form.
The attestation. So there is a final attestation form that we give to the patient and families, and we request that they sign it within 48 hours of taking the medication. It basically says I'm choosing to take advantage of this option. To be honest with you, there's no way to enforce that gets done. That's after my part is done. We give it to them. We ask them to turn it in. It doesn't always happen because I don't always know when the patient is going to take this. Sometimes I hear about it after the fact. So that's a part of the process, but there's no way to enforce that part of the process. And I would say I get it back about half the time.
There's a written form initially too.
The written request.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned that.
Yeah.
So, question.
Yes, if the person has trouble swallowing, is there another form that this
Yes.
medication is available?
Repeat it.
Yes. The question was, if someone has trouble swallowing, is there another way they can get the medication in? And the answer is yes. I haven't had to do that yet, but the way to do that would be to have an NG tube, a nasogastric tube, inserted that goes down through the nostril down into the stomach. And that's done a lot of times in hospitals or in nursing homes for people as a way to feed them. And so that can be done. And the liquid medication, I guess I'll talk a little bit about the forms of medication too, if you're interested. This liquid mixture can be put into a large syringe, about the size of that. And the patient themselves needs to be able to depress the plunger on that syringe to push the medication in. So you can bypass the mouth and the swallowing mechanism. The medications can also be given through a rectal tube, but again, the patient has to be able to push the plunger on whatever's going to put it in, and the absorption is a little less predictable. So that's something that would be a definite last choice.
For multiple reasons.
For multiple reasons. So there are many. There have been several patients that have been worried that they weren't going to be able to swallow it, either because they're having swallowing issues, because they have a very sensitive gag reflex. The medication does not taste good, but there's been nobody who has not.
How about antiemetics?
There has been nobody who hasn't been able to get the medication down pretty darn easily. Because at that point, they're just ready, and they'll drink pain thinner at that point. And we also prescribe medication that they take in advance to help prevent nausea. So that's taken about an hour before. And just real quickly, there's currently 2 forms of medication that are being used. The first is called Secanol, secabarbital. It's a sleeping pill, and I think it used to be called Reds. They were sold on the street, to bring you down after taking the amphetamines. And unfortunately, there's only one manufacturer, so I've heard. There's only one manufacturer of that medication, and they have jacked up the price to over $3,000 for a prescription of Secanol. It comes in capsules. It's 100 capsules. They get opened, and the powder is mixed with water, and it's about 4.5 to 5 ounces of total liquid.
Can you go down to Tijuana?
You can go down to Tijuana, but you can't get it there.
There's cheaper options though.
Yeah, the other option is now called DDMP, and it's morphine, Valium, digoxin, and propranolol. Medication to make you fall asleep, to help to stop your breathing, and 2 medications that are toxic to the heart. They're both, and that one costs about $600 to $700. That comes in powder. It's mixed by the pharmacist as a powder, and then it gets mixed with about the same amount of water. Neither of them taste good. The DDMP, they're both 100% effective.
Can you mix it with vodka?
Probably. It will, both of them will end your life, and universally. The problem is, I'm part of a group of physicians in California, Oregon, and Washington who are sharing data on the experiences of patients who have ingested these medications, the time to sleep, the time to death, what's happening in between. And the DDMP mixture, the cheaper alternative, is less predictable. The patient will fall asleep within 8 to 10 minutes, but there have been cases of people not dying for up to 7, 8, 10 hours. The patient's asleep, so they're not really suffering. The family is having a hard time with that. The Secanol is routinely, patients fall asleep in like 4 to 5 minutes, and most of the time they're dead in 20 to 30 minutes. So it's extremely quick and smooth. And with my patients, if that difference of $2,800 isn't going to have an impact on them, I will recommend that they use Secanol, because I don't want to see families having to struggle through hours of very difficult experience that they'll live with for the rest of their lives. I'm going to let someone else point, so no one. Can you call? Just bring the microphone to whoever and I'll answer their question.
Please hold up your hand high enough that the lady can bring you the mic so that the rest of the people can hear your question. If you're up here in front and you speak just to the speaker, nobody else can hear you. So the mic is up here.
And I'll repeat the questions.
Yeah. So with the Secanol, you need to take an antiemetic?
Yeah, we would use an antiemetic no matter what.
And how is that administered?
Well, it's a pill. We use Zofran and Reglan, a combination. 4 milligrams of Zofran and 20 milligrams of Reglan, and it's just taken with a couple sips of water about an hour before.
That would be a prescription medication.
Yeah. Most of these patients, the vast majority, are on hospice. Some of them have some of the medications around already, but I prescribe the antiemetics and the lethal prescription at the same time, and they're delivered by the pharmacy, right to your door.
How soon ahead would you have to take that?
The antiemetic, an hour.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does the law address the idea of whether the physician should be with the patient or not?
The question is, does the law address whether a physician should be with the patient or not? And the law says that there is no requirement of any medical personnel to be with the patient. There's no requirement that anybody be with the patient. It's highly recommended, and part of our counseling when we counsel patients and families is that somebody should be present with them, and that it should not be taken in a public place. That's about as far as it goes. And I know that many patients have taken the medication with their family or friends around. And I've been with about 20 people And I'm pretty sure in each of those cases, the family was extremely grateful to have a medical professional there. Even more so, a medical professional who's been through it several times. So I can help them understand what's the best way to mix it, what quantity, how fast it should be drunk, what position they should be in. Is that pause in breathing normal or abnormal? I haven't had to do any, I don't do anything other than give some guidance and just be a supporting presence. But I'm pretty sure that it's been valuable for them.
I was going to say, Bob, the young woman that's passing the microphone around is Jenna. She's a new employee. We've been an all-volunteer organization. No, she's not. She's a helper. She's an assistant. Yes, that's correcting me. But what she's done is call hospices in the San Diego County area, 21 of them, I think, right? And we are not going to put on our website and our newsletter those hospices that agreed to cooperate with the law until we have written confirmation about whether they actually will and to what extent. So Dr. Steinberg mentioned that Hospice by the Sea will refer patients to Dr. Bob. That's one way of doing it. And you have to remember that Dr. Bob is a fee-for-service doctor in his own practice, so that there's a cost attached to it. Hospice services are generally paid for by Medicare, and so that should be no cost. A couple of hospices, who I'm sorry to say are not here, said that their own doctors would sign the paperwork, even have a doctor on their own staff give the second opinion, and order the medication for the patient and be there when the patient took the medication. The staff would be there, not necessarily the doctor. So that's sort of full treatment, and it doesn't require the patient to go outside of that hospice if they want to use the End-of-Life Option Act. So far, do we have any written confirmations of those things, Jenna? One.
One issue on that is that there's a federal law from 1997 that completely prohibits any federally funded entity from participating in what they then called physician-assisted suicide. So hospices are funded through Medicare for the most part. So if you have the Medicare hospice benefit, then really hospice is not, they're not allowed to directly participate that way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Has that ever been litigated?
Not to my knowledge, and it would be nice that, I just think with the current climate, it's unlikely that we will see that change.
So it's interesting to me that you said that there is a hospice that said that they would do the entire process, because I thought that they would not be able to.
That's what we were told. Jenna talked to them, and as soon as we have written confirmation that that is the case, then we will publish that on our website and our newsletter so that people will know, because it's very confusing if you're at the end of your life and you should get hospice care and you're calling around and you're also thinking you would like to use the End-of-Life Option Act and the hospice you pick will not use it, then you're sort of in a pickle. So that's why we want to make sure that we can separate the hospices that will from the hospices that won't. And I have the impression, Jenna, that a lot of hospices are not even calling back. And it's very, very hard to pin them down as to yes or no. Even a no would be more helpful than we don't know.
Yeah.
I'm unclear as to the difference between
Can't hear you.
this light.
Is that on?
He can
I'm not
repeat
sure
it.
it's on.
How about now? Yes. I'm unclear as to the difference between requesting an end of life, a drip, an IV being put into your arm that puts you to sleep and then you pass, and what you gentlemen are talking about, getting Seconal or something else, grinding it up and swallowing it. So if I'm ready to go and I come to see you, why wouldn't I elect to have you put something in my arm and just go to sleep?
You live in America.
Because that would be illegal. I would lose my license. It's called euthanasia, and it's not legal.
But
It is in Canada, folks.
So explain the difference.
The difference, so people who are on hospice or in the hospital sometimes have IV medications given to them because that's the only way to alleviate their suffering. Their pain, their struggle breathing, other types of suffering. When they're in the hospital or on rare occasions on hospice, IV medications will be used to put somebody, to relieve their pain or suffering with the understanding that it is going to lead to unconsciousness, and once they're unconscious, they're no longer eating or drinking, and at that point, their life will come to an end within usually a matter of days. That is called palliative or terminal sedation, and that's done frequently in those settings. What we're talking about is different. What we're talking about is aid in dying, where you are making the choice to obtain this prescription so you have the control to choose the time and manner of your death. It's not intravenous, it has to be done orally. The End-of-Life Option Act, the Death with Dignity laws in the various states, they are all very, very similar and clear that the only way it's legal is if a person is able to ingest it on their own.
Unless you happen to be a resident of Canada, the Netherlands, Belgium, or Luxembourg. And all those places you can get intravenous medication and die that way. And we would like to see that happen here. But
I would say
hold your
there's
breath.
two other differences. I mean, one is just that when you use the End-of-Life Option Act, that's a lethal dose. It's a single dose. When we do terminal sedation or palliative sedation, that's not a lethal dose. And the other thing is the intent, right? Because intent's super important in bioethics. The intent in the End-of-Life Option Act is to end the life. The intent with palliative sedation is to relieve suffering.
Very good, great distinctions.
Can you just, both of you, give us some very basic contact information about how to reach either one of you? That's question one. And another very small one is, what's the difference between hospice by the sea, hospice by the hospital, and hospice at home?
So I
don't know which one sounds the best. I don't know.
I have cards and brochures on the table in the back there, and that's how to reach me. It has my cell phone number. If you need me emergently, call my cell phone number or email me, or my office number is on there as well. And I can't tell you about the difference between hospice by the hospital or hospice by the... I can tell you that I've worked with Hospice by the Sea a number of times, and I found them to be phenomenal. Incredibly responsive, incredibly compassionate, and very, very good for me to work with from a physician, and the patients and families have been very happy with their care. But I'm going to tell Dr. Steinberg tell you how to contact him.
I would just say hospicebythesea.org. I apologize, I did not bring any brochures. Maybe I'll get some to Faye so you can have them for the next meeting. But if you just Google Hospice by the Sea, it's not the one in Florida. Okay.
It's the other sea.
But the care is in your own home, whether you live by the sea or you don't.
Well, that's maybe you should.
Yeah.
Oh, and for the most part, in San Diego, in most communities, hospice is delivered in your home. There used to be an inpatient hospice, San Diego Hospice, that had about 24, 25, 22 rooms, and it was wonderful. They did a phenomenal job, and they trained a lot of people here in hospice and palliative care. But they no longer exist.
Now they'll be very expensive condos. The building got sold.
So again, most hospice is done in people's homes.
We thought about buying it.
Hi, my name is Lee. I'm with a pre-hospice here in San Diego. And Dr. Denge, who is texting me telling me she's sorry she's not here, she's actually explaining EOL at end of life with the patient as we speak.
Oh.
So she felt that was the place that she needed to be. And she is telling me that a Priva hospice, she wanted you to know that a Priva hospice is another hospice that respects the end of life, and that she, as a doctor, also assists with the decisions need to be made there. And she, however, will only write for Seconal And she also is the first doctor that got in San Diego County to get Medi-Cal to pay for that. And so that is her take that she wanted me to pass on to you guys.
Yeah, thank you. That's the third doctor we were expecting to hear from.
What
And it's
hospice?
Apriva, isn't it? A-P-R-E-V-A.
Yes,
Apriva.
ma'am, Apriva Hospice.
And that's who we actually got it in writing from.
Yes, thank you, thank you. See, Jenna said we actually got a statement in writing from that hospice. It's the only one we got.
And I'm glad you brought that up because Medi-Cal does cover it because it's not a federal, it's a state program. So that's, but probably most of you, just no offense, and just looking at the color of the hair, most of you are probably Medicare, have Medicare. So.
And we've had patients on Medi-Cal that we've put through the request for them to cover it, and it's been a very laborious process. So I might need to talk to Dr. Denke about how she did
Yeah,
that.
Dr. Denke, that's her
Yeah,
claim to
great.
fame. I'll give that prop because she says if not, it's 3368 total.
Yeah, so, and it has to do with the pharmacy. The pharmacy that we work with is phenomenal, and it may be the same one, but
Advanced care.
Advanced care, and they've had challenges with getting it reimbursed.
Do you need a compounding pharmacist for this?
Not for the Seconal, but for the other compound, the other powders, you need a compounding pharmacist, and that is not covered by Medi-Cal because it is compounded. It's not a standard prescription.
By the way, hospice covers you wherever you are, including under a bridge.
Correct.
So, I mean, homeless people get hospice services as well.
Correct.
We do advise people, by the way, to talk right now to your doctor about how he or she feels about this new law. If your doctor has any questions about what's involved, we can have him or her talk to one of our doctors and explain the law. We can send materials. If your doctor says, I absolutely will never do this under any circumstances, so help me God, I would suggest looking elsewhere. If your doctor at UCSD, for example, or Scripps or Kaiser says, it's not up to me, you can go to the social worker that we have on board and talk to her or him about how to find a doctor in this system, then you're covered because that means that system has somebody who will refer you to a doctor who will do this. And if your doctor says, well, I don't know enough about this and it's too complicated, we can have Dr. Bob or somebody else talk to your doctor about what's involved. And as Dr. Bob knows, it's not as complicated as it seems. And it is a cumbersome, difficult law. But once you have a doctor who's cooperative, it's not that bad.
Just to go back a little bit to the question of the IV versus the oral, I think that one of the reasons the law was written, or at least the law was written very carefully in order to make sure that the patient, it's the patient's decision and nobody else is implicated in any way. So that if someone starts an IV, in a sense, that's an implication for the person that started the IV that they're participating. So I believe that's the reason it was written that way, is to protect everybody except the patient, to be sure that nobody can make a case that anybody else is implicated in the decision. I think that was one of the reasons.
One man's protections are other people's obstacles. So the more protections the law has, the more difficult it is to use.
That's right.
But we have a lot of patients who actually have IVs for various purposes, but they're not getting any lethal doses of medication through it. So I think just having an IV doesn't necessarily implicate, or having a nurse having started the IV or a doctor. I mean, you can make a case for having somebody have an IV in place or put in, and a dose of a lethal medication that wouldn't have to be swallowed, that could be pushed by the patient through that IV, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think Carla wants to say something.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that's a correct theory because, first of all, it's legal, so there's not really a matter of anybody being implicated in it. But other persons are allowed to assist the patient in preparing the product. So they don't, the patient with ALS doesn't have to sit there and open up 100 capsules of Seconal, right? The family can do it, somebody from hospice can do it. So yeah, I'm not sure that's the exact reasoning behind it.
Isn't it more efficient if you could do it intravenously? I mean, it would be quicker and a doctor would be there too.
The question is, wouldn't it be more humane to allow it to be done intravenously? And yes.
And it wouldn't taste like shit either.
More than likely, yes. And it would be, we know how rapidly certain medications work when they're given IV. So yes, it would be, and I'm a proponent for that. Is it still on? Am I still allowed?
Yes.
So, but the law doesn't allow for it.
If you do it yourself?
How are you going to get the medication?
There are ways.
Of course there are. Just wanted to know if you knew how.
You're on video, okay?
Hi, my question is, I signed up for UCI World Body. If I decide to go this direction, could I still donate my body to science?
Yeah.
Yes.
In 2 months from now, we'll be talking about body donations, organ donations. It's a good question to ask.
And that brings up another quick point, that the cause of death, for somebody who takes advantage of this option, the cause of death on the death certificate is the underlying illness. There's no mention made. Nobody ever needs to know that this is the way that your life actually ended. You died according to because of the illness. Life insurance isn't impacted.
And the manner of death is natural, not suicide.
Right, yeah. No suicide, it's natural death.
What is the overall cost of the process that you have described, including the cost of the drugs, fees, etc.?
It depends. I have a set fee for me personally, coming out to the home, doing the 2 visits, including the visit to be there with the person, $3,000. I have a sliding scale. If that's too much for somebody, I'm willing to talk about what that would look like, okay? And I have done it for free. The medications cost anywhere from $700 to $3,500.
Hey, Bob, we're trying to get people to use the mic, but if they don't, please repeat the question so everybody can hear.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. Hey, you're doing great. You're
He was
doing
talking
great.
the money stuff, but it got me a little nervous.
Yes, the people out here should use the mic. But if they don't use the mic, please repeat the question.
Yeah, I just wondered, what is the cause of death listed for VSED, which Dr. Steinberg said he believes in, whereas you're like, not sure about?
You're not using the mic.
The question was, if someone does VSED, which I'd love to, once we get past all the questions around the end of life option, if we want to talk about VSED, voluntary stopping eating and drinking, I'd be happy to share some experiences around that.
And what do you sign them out?
And the cause of death is the underlying illness. And sometimes, yeah, but sometimes that you have to be a little creative, right? Because they don't always have a clearly terminal illness. When somebody chooses to stop eating and drinking and allow their life to end naturally that way, there's no requirement that they have a terminal illness. They may just have unbearable suffering and determine for themselves that life no longer holds value for them and is no longer worth living. So it could become, we could use protein calorie malnutrition as an underlying, because that is true. They become hypovolemic shock. But it's never self-induced death. That never shows up on a death certificate. But I'm assuming that there are doctors many doctors who would not support a person through a voluntary stop eating and drinking because it's unfamiliar to them and they wouldn't quite know how to approach some of those issues.
They wouldn't be part of it.
They probably wouldn't be part of it.
I wanted to comment on something Dr. Steinberg said at the beginning about celebrating that Canadian man's death you remember that was on the front page of the New York Times, a hugely long article about a month ago, I think. And of course, in Canada, he was going to get euthanasia shot in the arm. And he had a big party for his friends. And Dr. Steinberg was saying maybe making a hero out of him or something like that encourages more people to do it. Okay, it's a good argument. What I'm concerned about is people who die in horrible ways, where their family is standing there for weeks or months watching them die in pain and agony and loss of dignity, loss of personhood. And after celebrating that, then the newspaper says he died peacefully in his sleep. Yeah, right. I personally think it's time to celebrate people who make their own decisions and can choose to die peacefully.
I don't disagree.
Okay.
No, I think we're all.
So
I
I'd
think
like
we
to have
agree.
that kind of party myself.
Well, I know what you do. I second that. I totally believe in personal choice. And fortunately, I'm in a position to be able to help support people who also feel that way. I have to work within the confines of the law and the medical board. But I feel very fortunate that I'm in a position to be able to support people in something that is just that I believe it's our right. It's our right. We live good lives. There's nothing that should force us to stay in a body that's failing us, that is causing us pain and angst. Once we determine, and being of sound mind, that it's time to move on. Okay?
Also, I want to say something too about that. This law is only for people of sound mind. I don't think that's right. And it's only for people who are terminally ill. I don't think that's right either. And it's only people who can ingest and still swallow. I don't think that's right either. So we've been around for 30 years. We've seen a lot of progress in expanding our rights at the end of life. We have a lot of work to do for the next 30 years to make sure that everybody who wants to die peacefully can do so. And if it takes changing the law or breaking the law or expanding the law or whatever, we need to do that. And we are a membership organization, so please join the Hemlock Society of San Diego if you have not. Please sign up for our November 4th conference to get the whole thing encapsulated in one day with good food and at the Sheraton La Jolla. And tell your friends, because so many people are not willing or they don't even know where to get information about end-of-life choices. This is the place. We still have our guests here and we can still answer questions, so I didn't mean to interrupt that part.
My question is to both of you, but particularly Dr. Dom. Are you, because of the article or simply by virtue of the work you do, being harassed by the haters and the intolerant people who disagree with our theories and the process, etc.? Is there much contact?
The question was, have I been harassed by anybody because I'm putting myself out there as someone who's in support of this? And the answer is simply no. I've heard nothing from anybody. I've had no death threats. I've had no blood, poured on my window. There's been nothing. I'm not sure that'll continue, but so far so good.
Is there a medical term for your practice?
Well, the name of my practice is called Integrated MD Care, and the term for it is I'm a private home care physician. I do palliative care and end-of-life care. I'm looking for that expert title if you have one. There's no other doctors that really do what I do.
That guy up in the Bay Area.
Well, but Lonnie, there's a doctor in the Bay Area who actually his practice is called Bay Area End-of-Life Options. And if somebody's up in Northern California, they can find him because that's all he does. The only thing he does at this point in his career is help people through the end-of-life option. That's not me. My practice is focused on whatever people need to have the best possible quality of life, this being a portion of it.
Just need to spell Uslander, U-S-L-A-N-D-E-R.
We've been talking about most of the people here who have diagnosed with a terminal illness. What about the majority of the population that never encounters such a diagnosis? In other words, we get sick, we get slowly, we get repeatedly debilitated, we end up in a hospital, and then finally, we finally expire. In my papers, I have made it very clear that I don't want to be resuscitated, and in fact, I told my doctor if I should have a medical condition that might require an expensive procedure, without which I would probably die, I would say to him, fine, let me die. I've had a good life, I'm going, I don't want any more medication. By the way, I'm 89.
Good looking 89.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess the question in there is, what about the people who don't have a terminal illness and wouldn't qualify for the aid in dying law? How do you address them?
VSAID.
And so I have two, and he also mentioned that his doctor knows that he doesn't want any life-prolonging procedures.
He said expensive.
Expensive, lifelong.
Doesn't have to be.
So I think the key to that is it's not just your doctors that need to know that. Whoever is making medical decisions for you when you can't make them for yourself needs to know clearly what you want and what you don't want, what you're willing to go through and what you're not. That has to be documented. And you need to have a doctor who's going to support that and not try to encourage them to go, because once you're no longer able to make decisions, they can change they're speaking for you. And if the doctor convinces them that, it's really not that big of a deal, it's not that expensive, there's a good chance that he'll come back and be able to enjoy his ice cream again. So you have to make sure that there's a doctor who is going to be your advocate and work in partnership with your power of attorney to ensure that your wishes are being honored. For those people who get to a point where they're just done, where they no longer see that there's value there isn't enough quality in their life, and they are of sound mind and want to be done, everybody has the power to allow their life to end naturally through voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. And there's been a lot of fear and misunderstanding around this, and I think it comes from the media, and it comes from accounts of people who are going on starvation diets or being forcibly starved. I have been fortunate, I guess. I've been in the position to support a number of people through the VSAID process over the past year as well, because they didn't qualify, but it was clear that they wanted to be done. When somebody has the right support, which means the right family support of a hospice organization that can provide them with the right equipment and the right nursing, and a physician who's willing to make sure that they're comforted and everyone is aware of what's likely to happen, the actual process of dying through VSAID is peaceful, and it is a beautiful process.
This book, I don't know, have we got this back there, Pat? I don't know.
Yes, yes.
Choosing to Die by Phyllis Schachter. She's also on a TED program, TEDx or something. Her husband had early dementia, and he chose to die that way. I personally think it's creepy myself, but it took him 9 days to die, and the account by the two nurses who were in 2 different shifts is in this book. And also, Phyllis Schachter lists all the things you need to have in your home before somebody does this. It creeps me out, but anyway, I take Dr. Bob's word that it can be peaceful. I didn't think his death was peaceful, but then...
Different strokes.
That's right.
Right.
Yep,
And it is available to people. The one thing about End of Life Option Act is you have to start that process about 3 weeks at least beforehand, get to the 15-day waiting period and get the medication ordered and everything else. This way, if you just decide to stop eating and drinking, that's all that's necessary. So there's a lot of advantages to it. But she's pretty thorough in covering how that worked for her husband. who is very determined, by the way, to do this.
And there have been times when I've met somebody who wanted to talk, who wanted to go down the end-of-life option and get information about that. But it was clear that they were very worried that they wouldn't make it 15 days and still be competent or able to ingest the medication, or they were really struggling so much in that moment that the idea of being alive for 15 more days was just beyond what they could consider. So they can make that other choice and start that process whenever they want to.
I just want to echo what Bob said. In my experience, I've seen many people, probably, I don't know, but probably 100 or more, die from stopping eating and drinking, either voluntarily or because they had a big stroke and couldn't swallow anymore. It's really a very peaceful death. I mean, I can't remember anybody really having maybe there's somebody here that'll say, oh, I know somebody that had a horrible experience. If you really stop completely and there's medication to help it, it can be extraordinarily peaceful. It does take a while. And the other thing is, and I've had a couple of people have this where, you know, they stop for 3 or 4 days and then they change their mind. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So it just depends on how you look at it.
It is if your caregiver is not in sympathy with what you're doing. Could be like your daughter or something like that, and has watched it for 3 or 4 days and says this is enough, and take my mom to the hospital and rehydrate her. So
that's
very, you have to be very careful who's with you during that time.
Yeah, and don't do it without the right support. It's not something. It can be beautiful and peaceful, but but you really need to have the right support. You don't want to kind of go off into a corner and do this.
Yeah, I have a question about how active is the opposition to this law, and is it likely to come up again? There's something in the paper about it recently.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lawsuit by a bunch of doctors in California to rescind this law.
You know, we're blessed, folks. We live in California. I don't think, I'm just predicting that there will not be any problems with it. Now, the law's only good for 10 years. It sunsets after 10 years. So I don't know what will happen by then, but we do live in I know San Diego County is a little bit red, but we live in a pretty blue place, and I don't know, I shouldn't be getting political.
I wouldn't be so sanguine about the situation now in this country. The laws that we've had over the years, starting in California in 1976 with the first living will law, were very hard fought and opposed by so many people. Every state in the Union, except California, thought this was a crazy idea, even to have a living will law. And it took a lot of time for these laws to be widespread. Now there's 6 jurisdictions that have a right to die law, like medical assisted dying law. I think it could easily turn around with the wrong Supreme Court and the wrong legal system, and I wouldn't be sanguine that we have this forever, like the tablets on Mount Sinai, not at all. There's strong, well-financed groups that would like to see all this disappear.
I read the book Final Exit quite a while ago, and my memory is that it gave us information on how to help ourselves die. Is that not so? You didn't mention that.
Well, this is not the November conference. The November conference was covering everything. This is supposed to be only on the end-of-life option law. We have a segment on do-it-yourself methods. And that's where Derek Humphrey, who founded the Hemlock Society, pioneered in writing the book, Final Exit, now in its 3rd edition, but he also has addendum to the book, an addendum to the book that you can buy on his website that we have back there, yes, Pat? Yeah. Yes. We have the addendum, so he's trying to update it. Do-it-yourself methods are risky, and many of them are not legal. We don't believe in any methods that are violent, that people have to do alone, and that are not certain. So that restricts it very much. If anybody, and some people here have contacted us about methods that they think will work, and we have conferences on do-it-yourself methods. But that's risky, so we have the laws that we talked about today, and that hopefully will encompass everything that we need, because it's hard to say, go down to Tijuana and get this medication. First of all, you'd be breaking a law, and you'd be subject to arrest, and thirdly, you don't know what you're getting, and so it's a risky business, this do-it-yourself thing. But Final Exit is a good source of this material with the current addendum that Derek included. Derek will be here to speak at a November conference. He founded this he helped us found this organization 30 years ago. So we're all a little bit older now, of course.
What would be your priorities for strengthening this law?
Oh, easy. Thank you, Michael. What a straight man. I'd like to see us do what Canada does and have lethal injection as an option. I'd like to see us be much broader and use the criterion that is used practically everywhere else, not terminal illness, not how long you have to live, but how much you're suffering. So in Europe, it's unbearable suffering is defined by the patient, which has very little relationship to how long you have to live. And so I'd like to see it more universal, easier to use, and not necessarily restricted to ingestion or to terminal illness. In some of the European countries, it applies to people with intractable psychiatric illnesses. It applies to minor children with parental consent. And it applies to people who, as Dr. Bob said, who may be tired of living, what some people call old age rational suicide. A very good friend of mine in London, Dr. Michael Irwin, wrote a recent article or talked to the London Times about that he's been campaigning for a long time, that people should be able to die when they're finished with life, and that they are having a number of medical complaints that don't lead to terminal diagnosis. So there's a long way to go with this. Some countries have gone a long way and still going, Netherlands being the most prominent of those. And we are somewhere in the middle. Some countries don't have any kind of laws. Some countries don't have medical assistance in dying laws, and some countries do. Switzerland is one of the most progressive countries, even though they don't have euthanasia as such. You have to ingest the medication. But they have organizations all over the country there, Exit, which will help their own Swiss citizens die. And then now there's 4 organizations that will help people from other countries die. So the fight's not over. We're not closing our doors after year 30. In fact, we have a lot to do, so help us.
You mentioned some VSED medications to help things along. What might they be?
Well, they're somewhat individualized, but the ones that are most common are fentanyl, which is a patch that can be applied. And then morphine and Ativan are the gold standards that are used in many hospice, for many hospice patients for pain relief of suffering and anxiety. A lot of people don't really want to be medicated right up front. They really want to be aware as things are unfolding, especially those people who aren't in intractable pain. And it's interesting what happens, as long as you're attending to their comfort with moistening their mouth, little spray misters, personal comfort. When the body starts breaking down because of dehydration and lack of calories, the body goes into this what's called ketogenesis. It starts breaking down muscle, and some of the chemicals that are released actually can cause some euphoria and a feeling of more general well-being, and that often starts happening around day 3, 4, and so there's this period where people are starting to, they go through the first 24 hours and they get through the hunger pains, and then they start feeling the dryness and the weakness associated with getting dehydrated, and then they kind of go through this more pleasant phase, and they're contemplative and wanting to communicate with loved ones. And then they often will, after about day, depending on the individual and what their underlying condition is, often on day anywhere between 3, 4, 5, they just start sleeping quite a bit more. And then from that point, slip into where they're mostly unconscious, maybe open their eyes in response to questions or when loved ones are nearby. Often after set day 6, 7, 8, then they're in a deep state of unconsciousness. And I just had a gentleman who, it was 8 days. He was actually in pretty good physical health. He had advanced Parkinson's, but 8 days was, and it was really a beautiful process to be part of. We've had people who go as quickly as 4 days, and then others who apparently, your mom apparently was longer. I haven't had anybody who's lasted through that process more than 11 days.
Of course, you become incontinent and can't go to the
Yes.
bathroom by yourself.
Yes, all of those things.
Yeah, but then, there's not a whole lot of urine output after the first couple days. Yeah, it's not as big an issue as you might think. But if you have a kid that doesn't want to clean up, that's what hospice is for.
Yeah, your kid should do
But,
it.
and you need to get caregivers in to provide the personal support. So it's a process. You don't want to. I don't think you would want to just do this, make the decision tomorrow, and start without getting the right things in place. You may not have to go quite as crazy as Phyllis Schachter and all of that, because there can be people who can come in there and make sure that you have all those things and you thought about them. I will say that sometimes it can be a bit of a challenge to get a hospice agency to admit somebody who's starting this process who doesn't have a clear terminal diagnosis right off the bat. And so it requires a bit of finesse on that.
Okay, it's 3 o'clock. Our guest will be